A frigid whisper snaked through the quiet suburban streets of Havenwood, chilling the very soul. It wasn't the autumn breeze, but the unspoken truth, poised to shatter lives. If someone had spun a tale like this to me a year ago, I'd have guffawed, dismissing it as cheap fiction. But now, as I trace the intricate threads that wove my ordinary summer into a tapestry of moral quandaries and fractured affections, laughter is a forgotten sound. This isn't just my story. It's a chilling testament to how quickly light can turn to shadow. You think you know where this is going, don't you? A classic love triangle. But what if the lines blur so profoundly the triangles overlap, and the very foundation of family collapses into an abyss of silent understanding and devastating betrayal? Are you ready to dive into the heart of a secret that should never have bloomed? Then settle in, because this is the tale of Leo, Summer, and Elara, and the unbearable weight of impossible choices. Leo, a 25-year-old aspiring cinematographer, found myself adrift when my passion project's funding evaporated. My usual domain of bustling city studios felt miles away, replaced by the hushed tranquility of Havenwood, a small leafy town known for its sprawling rose gardens and perpetual golden hour. My girlfriend, Summer, had offered refuge at her family home, a quaint, sun-drenched cottage with ivy-clad walls and a scent of old books. Summer was my bright, unwavering star, a 23-year-old artist whose laughter was as effervescent as freshly uncorked champagne. She loved me with the unblemished innocence of someone who had never known heartbreak, and I clung to that purity like a lifeline. Yet, from the moment the front door creaked open, a different kind of light poured into my life. Elara, Summer's mother, was an enigma. She defied every preconceived notion of a maternal figure. 45, with a cascade of dark auburn hair and eyes like polished mahogany, she moved with an unhurried grace. She greeted me with a voice like worn velvet, a low murmur that hinted at untold stories. There was no fuss, no overwhelming warmth, just a quiet, piercing gaze that seemed to peel back layers. As Summer clung to me, exclaiming, "See, I told you my mom's unique." A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor began deep within me. It was the first grain of sand slipping into an hourglass I didn't know existed. My temporary sanctuary was an old conservatory, repurposed into a bedroom. Sunlight poured through the panoramic windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the afternoon air. Elara had thoughtfully placed a collection of books on the bedside table, forgotten classics, a volume of forgotten poetry, and a rare edition on classic cinema. "Thought you might appreciate these," she'd murmured, her voice a soft current. I was stunned. She hadn't asked my preferences, yet her selection was uncannily perfect. You read these?" I stammered, pointing to the film theory text. A faint, almost sorrowful smile touched her lips. Summer's father was a film historian. I've known that world since the days of hand-developing negatives. That revelation shouldn't have made my pulse quicken, but it did. That night, as Summer nestled her head in my lap, lost in a streaming series, Elara appeared on the porch like a wraith, silently placing a tray of aromatic ginger cookies on the table. She neither spoke nor lingered, disappearing as swiftly as she arrived. "My mom's so subtle, isn't she?" Summer whispered, kissing my cheek. I laughed, a hollow sound, for I sensed something far deeper in Elara's stillness, a profound quietude that Summer, in her radiant simplicity, couldn't comprehend. The true unraveling began on my first night. At 2 a.m., a haunting melody drifted from the living room. I found Elara silhouetted by moonlight, her fingers coaxing melancholy notes from an old acoustic guitar. The music was a wordless ballad, tender and fragile, meant for no one, yet it pierced me to the core. I stood there, a silent observer in the darkness, and a chilling premonition settled in my gut. This summer, It would be anything but simple. Chapter. Havenwood mornings possessed an ethereal gentleness. The only sounds were the rustling leaves, birdsong, and the quiet hiss of Ilara's coffee maker. On my third day, a restless dawn found me at 6 a.m. I wandered towards the kitchen, only to stop dead. Ilara was on the porch, her back to me, pruning the cascading wisteria. Dressed in a simple cream tank top and linen shorts, the early light kissed her shoulders, creating a halo of honeyed gold. I wasn't deliberately watching, yet my gaze was inexplicably fixed. There was a subtle curve to her back, a faded tan that echoed a forgotten poem. There are women whom time chooses as frames, needing no adornment. As I descended the steps, she turned. "Morning," she greeted, pruning shears, still in hand. "Night owl and early bird," I mumbled, explaining my restless sleep. "It's just, the mornings here are too beautiful to miss." She smiled then, a genuine, unforced smile born of profound experience, of loving, of losing, of learning to breathe again. 15 minutes later, Summer bounded down, yawning and complaining about the ungodly hour. "You didn't sleep in my room?" she grumbled, her voice thick with sleep. I just smiled. Summer was so effortlessly carefree, so unburdened, that sometimes her easygoing nature made me feel utterly alien. Breakfast was a quiet affair, garlic toast and fried eggs. Summer danced around the kitchen, nearly toppling her orange juice, while Ilara merely shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. Then she turned to me. "You should eat more. You look a little thin." Her gaze was not one of maternal concern, but something deeper, something that spoke of long-held affection, of understanding a man's quiet struggles. Later that afternoon, while Summer and her friend Chloe were at the market, I edited footage in the living room. Ilara sat across from me, absorbed in a book. No words were exchanged, no need for them. Only the rhythmic tap of my keyboard, the soft rustle of pages, and the golden sunlight pooling on the floor. She wore a flowing olive dress, an ancient leather bracelet gracing her wrist. As the light filtered through the curtains, it illuminated a faint scar on her neck, a silent question mark. I yearned to ask about it, but dared not. "What's your film about?" she finally asked, her eyes meeting mine. "Repetition," I replied. "People making the same mistakes over and over, but each time it feels new." She regarded me for a long moment, then nodded. "Sounds like real life." That evening, as Summer snuggled into my arms, murmuring about the tranquility of her home, I felt an unsettling disconnect. Summer loved her life, simple and bright. Ilara, however, seemed to be navigating a silent, complex journey of her own. The image of the sunlight on Ilara's shoulders that morning remained etched in my mind, a persistent echo. Summer's laughter was a constant, bright presence, a response to loud music, spilled milk, or my exhaustion. At first I cherished it. It was clear, crisp, and filled the house with joy. But as the days bled into weeks, I craved something else. A quiet embrace, a silent nod of understanding. Summer, in her boundless cheerfulness, simply wasn't built for silence. One evening, wrestling with a 4-minute montage that refused to sync with the audio, headphones clamped to my ears, my eyes burning, I heard Summer's boisterous laughter from the kitchen. Chloe had apparently just recounted a hilarious mishap with a delivery driver. Summer's shouts of mirth grated on my raw nerves. My mind was a whirlwind of deadlines, urgent emails from my professors, and the crushing fear of not securing funding. I escaped to the porch, seeking solace in the twilight. Not long after, Ilara brought me a glass of iced water. "You look tired," she observed softly. I nodded. Project stuck. She didn't ask for details, simply sat beside me, her own cup of mint tea steaming gently, her gaze fixed on the garden. No forced comfort, no unsolicited advice, just shared silence. For the first time in days, I felt a fragile peace. "You know," Elara mused, her voice a low current, "I once knew a man who never spoke of his burdens, until one day he shattered." I looked up. She wasn't looking at me, but into the deepening shadows. "After that, I learned not to prod, just to be present if they needed." I chuckled. "I'm not good at sharing either." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm a director. I pour it all into the film." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "Me too. Except my film was never shot." Summer was still buoyant when I returned to the room. She flung herself onto the bed, embracing me. "Miss me." "Done? Want to watch a movie?" I nodded, pulling her close, desperately trying to banish the unsettling thoughts that had bloomed beside Elara. Summer's laughter punctuated the entire movie, even when I found no humor. There were moments when I gazed at her, this vibrant girl who loved me so completely, yet seemed oblivious to the quiet anxiety in my eyes, the ragged breaths after a day of creative deadlock. She loved me, but she didn't understand me. Past midnight, unable to sleep, I crept out. The porch light was still on. Elara sat there, wrapped in a thin shawl, lost in contemplation of the full moon. "I made some mint tea," she offered, her voice calm, devoid of surprise at my presence. I sat, accepting the cup. Silence settled between us, thick with unspoken thoughts. "You usually stay up this late?" I asked softly. "No, but there's a moon tonight." I recalled a fleeting thought. Moonlight sometimes lessens the sting of loneliness. I looked at her, saying nothing. In that moment, a stark, undeniable truth crystallized. Elara was not someone I should be drawn to, yet she was the only one who made me feel less alone. One sweltering afternoon, while I was color-correcting footage, the distinct rumble of an unfamiliar truck echoed from the driveway. Not Summer's compact car, but a heavier, older engine. I stepped onto the porch just as the truck door clicked shut, and a tall, silver-haired man, his sleeves rolled up, strode confidently towards the house. He exuded an aura of calm strength, the kind of man who'd rescue you from a burning building without a hint of bravado. Elara opened the door. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then a soft smile bloomed. "Grant." "Hey, El." His voice was a deep, resonant rumble that instilled immediate trust. I stood frozen, unsure whether to greet him or retreat. Elara turned to me. "Leo, this is Grant, an old friend." Grant nodded. "Hi." "You Summer's boyfriend?" His question was light, yet I detected an almost imperceptible probing beneath the surface. "Yeah," I replied, "staying here for the summer." "Oh, great. House is as peaceful as ever." Grant's gaze swept around, then settled back on Elara. "Brought some dark grapes. You still like them, right?" Elara's smile softened. "Thanks." I forced a smile and retreated inside, but the low murmur of their laughter, the easy familiarity between them, resonated in my ears. It felt as if they shared a secret summer, one that had existed long before I arrived. That evening, Elara prepared a simple salad and grilled fish. Summer came home late, so it was just the three of us. Grant recounted tales of their youth, hiking mishaps, bottles of shared wine when Elara was a new widow. "If it weren't for work, I never would have left Havenwood," Grant mused, his gaze lingering on Elara. She offered no reply, only a faint smile, quietly adding more vegetables to my plate. "Making a film, are you?" Grant turned to me. "Yes, a short project. Must be stressful. Had a nephew, studied communications, dropped out from the pressure." I nodded politely, a part of me itching to escape the table. Elara's voice, a soft inquiry, broke the tension. How long do you plan to stay in Havenwood, Grant? A few weeks, maybe, he replied. Do you mind if I drop by now and then? No, she smiled. I couldn't bring myself to eat anymore. After dinner, as I washed dishes, Ilara stood by the window, hanging towels Grant had left. The subtle tension between us, however, lingered. What is he to you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, my gaze fixed on the soapy water. Ilara paused, then her voice, light as a missed heartbeat, replied, A part of your youth. But it's long gone. She turned, her eyes meeting mine. I don't think he came here just to bring grapes. Then her voice hardened almost imperceptibly. And you came here just to live with your girlfriend for the summer? I fell silent. So did Ilara. Finally she spoke again, her voice laced with weary resignation. Leo, I don't need you to be jealous. I don't need Grant to prove anything. I just want everything to be quiet. She left the kitchen, leaving me alone with the dishes, and a heart that felt like it was silently fracturing. Chloe, Summer's friend, was not one for many words. She observed, absorbed, and then, at unexpected moments, dropped a line that cut deep. I had always thought Chloe a little cold, but that day her gaze felt icy, and the silence she left in the kitchen felt heavy. That afternoon, Summer had invited Chloe for dinner and a movie. Ilara cooked lasagna, Summer helped with the vegetables, while I fussed around washing fruits. Ilara stood beside me, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, her white shirt slightly open at the neck, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone. Can you pass me the paring knife? She asked, her eyes never leaving the cutting board. I nodded, reaching out. My hand brushed hers as I passed the knife. A casual touch, yet we both froze for a split second, brief but long enough for a current to spark. Then I looked up. Chloe stood in the kitchen doorway. She said nothing, no frown, no smile, just stood there, her eyes sharp as a newly honed blade. Ilara was the first to turn away, wiping her hands on a towel. I tried to act nonchalant, but my heart hammered against my ribs. I'm thirsty, Chloe stated, her voice flat. She poured herself a drink, took a sip, and walked back into the living room, never looking back. Later that night, half an hour into the movie, Chloe pulled out her phone, feigning interest in a text message. Summer, oblivious, continued to hug her pillow, excitedly dissecting the impending plot twist. My phone buzzed, just as the protagonist was about to be murdered. You should have told her before I did. I read it 3 times. A heavy, icy dread settled in my stomach. I glanced at Chloe. She was still staring at the screen, her eyes unblinking. I didn't reply. Not because I had no words, but because I knew any reply would signal the beginning of the end. 2 days later, I found Chloe sitting alone on the porch. Summer was showering, and Ilara was doing laundry. I stepped out, naively hoping to defuse a ticking time bomb that hadn't yet exploded. Do you like Havenwood? I asked, settling into the opposite chair. Yeah, the air here makes you think more. I nodded. Chloe turned, her eyes dark and unwavering. Do you love summer? The question landed like a sharp cut. Of course. No, she shook her head. I'm asking if you truly, really still have feelings for her. Not the convenient answer, Leo. I froze. My tongue felt like lead. She looked directly at me. Leo, I don't know what happened between you and Ilara, but I know something did, and if you let Summer discover it in the most painful way, I won't forgive you. I nodded dryly. I don't want to hurt anyone. Then don't leave it all to me. She rose, walking inside. The faint scent of jasmine lingered from her hair, gentle, yet her words had cut like a knife. That night, sleep eluded me. I gazed at Summer, curled beside me, her face innocent, serene, untouched by worry. Why, I wondered, was it always the most carefree who suffered the most? I turned away. Outside the window, a soft footfall on the porch. Elara. Not a ghost, not the moonlight, just the only woman in the house who heard the broken words that were never spoken. It rained around 7 that night, the first downpour of summer. It arrived as suddenly as if the sky itself had tipped a colossal bucket over the small town. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, coalescing into a velvety mass. Then, lightning flashed, a straight, searing white line so fast I felt it had struck me. Summer wasn't home. She was at a friend's birthday party with Chloe. Elara had suggested I join them, but I declined, feigning the need to edit. The rain intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm against the windows. The house was so quiet I could hear every drop. I descended to the kitchen for coffee and found Elara standing by the window, a knee-length sweater draped over her, a cup of tea in her hand, gazing out. "Not going with Summer?" she asked, without turning. "Not much for crowds," she hummed, offering no further comment. We stood side by side, watching the lavender plants in the garden disappear beneath the deluge. Thunder rumbled in the distance, then closer. "Are you afraid of thunder?" I asked, just to break the frantic pounding of my own heart. "I used to be," she replied, "but after my husband passed, I realized there are things that hurt far worse than thunder." I was silent. A moment later, the power flickered and died. Darkness engulfed the house. Elara retrieved candles from a drawer. I helped her light them one by one, their flickering glow illuminating her face, older than by day, yet strangely more beautiful. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the living room couch. I sat, and she settled across from me. Between us, 2 cups of peppermint tea shimmered in the candlelight. "I like the rain," she whispered, her eyes catching the glow. "It makes people more honest." I nodded. "Because we can't see each other's faces? Because no one is sane enough to keep a mask on." Silence. Then her eyes lifted, meeting mine. "What are you most afraid of, Leo?" The question was a knife, plunging into my chest. I swallowed. "Afraid of hurting good people. What about bad people?" "I've never hurt bad people," she smiled, but it was a sad, knowing smile. "I used to think I was a good person too, until I did something I shouldn't have." A blinding flash of lightning illuminated the room. In that instant, Elara was no longer Summer's mother. She was a woman. Auburn eyes, curled lashes, dry lips, and a faint tremor in her hands. Someone who had lost too much to fear losing more. Someone who had never been truly loved back, yet still hoped, even silently. I stood, stepping closer. Elara didn't flinch. The distance between us was now only a breath. I raised my hand, not to touch, but to affirm that I could stop. She didn't pull away, just looked at me for a long, profound moment. Then she rested her forehead against mine. No kiss, no whisper, just foreheads touching, breaths mingling, hearts skipping beats, boundaries trembling. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "Me too," she replied, a breath against my skin. Yet neither of us retreated. As the rain continued its relentless fall, Summer was blocks away, probably laughing, sipping soda, oblivious, proud of her director boyfriend, and I, standing in the dark with her mother, foreheads touching, as if seeking a solitary refuge in the thunder's roar. I knew this couldn't go on. But in that moment we didn't stop, not by action, but by feeling, and sometimes that's the one thing that truly can't be undone. Chapter 2. After that tempestuous night, a new, dangerous chasm opened between Elara and me. Thin, wide, and fraught with peril. We spoke no more of it. We avoided eye contact, never lingered for more than 3 seconds, never accidentally brushed shoulders in the kitchen. It was as if nothing had transpired. Yet we both knew something irreversible had been unleashed, and it could not be contained. Summer remained the same carefree spirit. She loved me as one loves the sun, believing it would always be there, bright and constant. She hugged me each morning, texted me from the next room, laughed when I scowled at corrupted audio files. I tried desperately to love her with the same uncomplicated devotion, but every time Summer lay in my arms, I saw Ilara's eyes, the depth of a lifetime of unspoken burdens. Guilt gnawed at me. I felt utterly lost. Grant returned that Thursday afternoon, a bottle of aged Merlot in hand. "He can't drink," Ilara said softly as Grant uncorked it. "I'll have it instead," Grant chuckled, "and Leo drinks tea." "I'm setting up a night scene," I interjected, a forced smile on my face. Grant's gaze lingered on me, sharp, as if peeling back a mask. "You look tired." "That's normal. Film students never sleep, or is something else keeping you up?" I set down my tea. "What do you mean?" Grant shrugged. I was young once. Tried to hide things I shouldn't have." Ilara shot Grant a warning glance. That night, as I washed dishes, Ilara entered the kitchen, her hair gilded by the warm light. "I'm sorry about Grant," she said softly. "It's okay," I replied. "I know he's a little blunt." "Grant's not a bad man," she continued, her voice even. "Just the man you used to sleep with," I retorted, the words sharper than I intended. She paused, her eyes fixed on mine. "We ended a long time ago." "But he kept coming back." Her gaze on me was unwavering. "Still looking at you like he was just waiting for you to nod." I didn't nod. I was silent. Ilara moved closer, her voice low. "Leo, we can't make this mistake again. Summer doesn't deserve this." "I know," I whispered. "Then stop." "I did," I replied, my voice almost inaudible. "But you didn't." Ilara stepped back, her eyes blurring. "I'm your mother," she whispered, her voice laced with pain. "I'm not allowed to fall." Then she turned away, and for the first time I saw her shoulders tremble. I wandered into the backyard. The rain had ceased, but the air was still damp. The light from the house cast Ilara's silhouette against the curtains. She stood alone in the kitchen, her arms resting on the counter, her head bowed. Why was she so strong, I wondered. And why did that strength only make me love her more? It was late. I returned to my room and found Summer asleep, her face pressed into the pillow, hair fanned around her, lips pursed like a child's. I lay beside her, not touching, not speaking. I simply lay there, suspended between two worlds, one as bright and radiant as Summer's smile, the other as dark, quiet and slow as Ilara's breathing in the night. I belonged nowhere, and that was the most terrifying struggle of all. Chloe hadn't spoken to me since her text. She appeared as usual, still smiling, still helping Summer fold clothes, still casting silent glances that seemed to read every unspoken sentence within me. But I knew something inside her had solidified, and a storm, though not yet unleashed, hovered ominously. That afternoon, Summer spread her clothes across the living room floor, a colorful bikini in hand, chattering excitedly. "This weekend's gonna be super fun," she exclaimed, folding an item. "I booked a room for 3. Remember your camera, we're vlogging." My headphones hung loosely as I adjusted audio levels. "Yeah, whatever, 3 people?" Chloe looked up, a slight arch to her eyebrow. "Not 4? Why don't you invite your mom?" "Stop it," Summer laughed, playfully swatting Chloe's arm. "Mom's no fun. She'll make us eat breakfast at 7 a.m. and ban karaoke after 10 p.m. I forced a smile, trying to keep my eyes on the screen. but I felt Chloe's gaze. It didn't pierce directly, but rather quietly infiltrated. Later that afternoon, when Summer left for the market, Chloe stayed behind, feigning a trip to the restroom. I had just stepped into the kitchen for water when I heard her voice from the porch, calm and deceptively caring. "Elara, do you need any help?" "Thanks, I'm done," Elara replied, her hands steadily pruning the lavender. "You still grow lavender, just like when I was in high school." Chloe took a few steps closer, her voice soft, yet deep. "Yes," Elara smiled faintly, her eyes still on the flowers. "They're the only ones that can withstand both rain and sun. Like some people." Chloe let the half-sentence hang in the air, then fell silent. Elara looked up. Our eyes met, and I, standing in the kitchen, felt the static electricity crackling from the porch, spreading across my skin. That evening, Chloe stood on the porch waiting as I poured water. "How long are you going to keep quiet?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the potted plants. I paused. "Chloe, do you think Summer is so stupid she can't see anything?" Her voice was even, firm. "She trusted you so much that she blinded herself." I lowered my head, my hand gripping the glass. "I didn't mean to." "You don't have to try," Chloe interrupted, her eyes glancing at me like razor blades. "You just need to continue to stay silent to kill her." I fell silent, not because I didn't want to talk, but because any excuse now seemed hollow, cheap. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I whispered. "Then don't let the most vulnerable person discover the truth from someone else," Chloe said firmly, then turned away, leaving me alone in the windless sunset. 2 days later, Summer went into Elara's room to borrow a towel. The door was unlocked. "I'll borrow a towel, Mom." Summer pushed the door open and paused. I had just emerged from the bathroom, and hearing Summer's voice, I rushed over, but it was too late. She stood before Elara's dressing table, holding a photograph printed on old paper. It was a shot I had taken of Elara, bathed in the sunlight spilling onto the porch, her shoulder caught in amber light. She wasn't smiling, wasn't posing, just a straight, raw gaze. So real I had kept it like an indelible film. "When did you take this?" Summer asked, her voice trembling and low, the excitement gone. I stood there, stunned. Elara descended the stairs, and seeing the tableau, she froze on the steps. "Is there something going on between you two?" Summer turned to face both of us, her lips pressed into a thin line. No one answered. "Answer me." Her voice was harsh, laced with a rare pain. I stammered. "I didn't mean to." "Do you love me?" Summer interrupted, her eyes fixed on me, her voice cracking as if she were about to weep. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't nod, and my failed attempt to shake my head was the answer. Summer laughed, a short, bitter sound trapped in her throat. "So all this time, I've been the bridge?" She took a step back, clutching the photo. "And you too. You're the ones who came later, but refused to stay behind." "Summer!" Elara began, stepping towards her. "Don't!" Summer recoiled faster, her eyes filled with devastating disappointment. "You're my mother." She turned and walked quickly to the door, without a bag or a coat. I ran after her, calling Summer's name, but the door slammed shut. From inside, I could only hear Elara slumping into a chair, her hands covering her face. And I stood there, in the middle of a house with two figures, no longer belonging to either. Chatubi. Summer vanished like a streak of lightning across a darkened sky. Brilliant for a second, then nothing. She didn't answer her phone, didn't text, didn't come home. Chloe confirmed she was at a friend's house. The answer was short, decisive, but I knew the coolness in Chloe's voice wasn't just anger. It was disappointment, and disappointment was the cruelest emotion I had ever witnessed in a woman. I sat in the living room late into the night, lights off, windows cracked open. The damp scent of last night's rain still clung to the old wood. Elara was upstairs, her room sealed shut for 3 days. No music, no piano, no scent of peppermint tea drifting down. She too was gone, but in a different way. I went to the kitchen, seeking an arbitrary task: wash dishes, wipe the table, rearrange spice jars. But my hands trembled, my mind a broken record, every image, every word, every accidental touch, replaying like a fractured film on loop. I collapsed into a chair, burying my face in my hands, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I cried. The next morning, I heard Elara's door open. She descended, exhausted, her hair pulled back, eyes deep and red, as if she had endured a sleepless winter. I stood silently. Elara looked at me, then asked softly, "Do you know where Summer is?" Her voice was hoarse, worn out. I shook my head. No. Elara nodded faintly, no blame in her gaze. She walked to the teapot, poured water, but her hands shook so violently the water sloshed onto the table. I stepped forward, reaching out to help, but she flinched slightly. "Sorry," I murmured, pulling my hand back. Elara didn't look at me. "I don't blame you, Leo. I deserve this. You didn't force me." "But you didn't back down." She looked up, our eyes meeting in a split second where pride, affection, and guilt all jostled for space. "I'm Summer's mother, Leo," she said, her voice choking, "and I fell in love with the wrong person at the wrong time." I nodded, like a condemned man accepting a final verdict. "So this is where it ends?" I asked, unsure of what I wanted to hear. Elara looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes." It should end. That afternoon I drove to the lake near Havenwood, the place where Summer had first proposed a picnic. I sat there, gazing at the water, doing nothing. An old man walked by with his dog, offering a quiet greeting. I nodded, but his eyes lingered longer than usual, as if he could read something in my face that I myself didn't know. Had he ever betrayed someone, I wondered? Would he feel this same suffocating dread? It felt like I'd spilled something that could never be unspilled, and now every apology was a mere tissue placed in the path of a flood. When I returned, dusk was settling. Elara was no longer in the living room, but a piece of paper lay on the table. The handwriting was soft, neat, slightly slanted to the right, unmistakably hers. "Leo, some mistakes make you grow, some mistakes make you age. Thank you for giving me both." I folded the paper and held it against my chest. Then I sank into the chair, and I truly didn't know what else I had left in this house. The night was so quiet, it felt as if the world had ceased to turn. No moon, no cars, just the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I sat on the living room couch, my laptop propped on the table, the screen casting a hazy glow on unedited footage. My mind too far away. Elara's shadow passed in the hallway on the second floor, then came the slow, soft cadence of footsteps on the wooden stairs. I stood. Elara was in the kitchen, quietly pouring water. Her ivory silk robe skimmed just below her knees, her neckline open enough to reveal delicate collarbones, her soft shoulders glistening in the dim light. I walked in. "Can't you sleep?" I asked softly. She didn't look at me, merely set down her glass of water. "Why sleep, when even your dreams aren't enough to deceive you?" I stood opposite her, silent. Elara turned, her eyes meeting mine. No accusations, no concealment, just the profound weariness of a woman who had not been gentle with herself for too long. "Leo, have you ever thought about what is the most beautiful thing left when you lose your youth?" she asked, her voice as deep as the night wind. "I have," I said, my gaze fixed on her. "And I see it. Elara paused for a second, her lips parting slightly. I took a step closer, close enough to hear her breathing. Slow, deep, and a little shaky. "You're still beautiful," I whispered. "Not the kind of beauty that makes people turn back, but the kind that makes people stop and stare." She chuckled. Then her eyes softened, her chest heaving slightly. "Leo." I reached out, gently touching her cheek. For the first time I felt her skin, not as smooth as Summer's, but warm and real, like a solid place to lean. She didn't move away. My fingers traced along her jawline, firm yet delicate, and down her neck, where the delicate folds of skin hinted at springs that would never return. Elara looked up, her dark auburn eyes holding something both vulnerable and uncaring. I leaned down, my lips brushing hers hesitantly at first, then with a sudden, desperate need. She responded not hastily, but with a sense of having been held back for far too long. We moved instinctively to the living room. Elara sat on the couch. I knelt before her. Her hand rested on my neck, her fingertips tracing slow circles on my skin, as if searching for a rhythm that had been lost for years. The robe slid from her shoulders. Before me was the body of a woman who had carried life, who had nurtured a child, who had spent lonely nights unseen, unknown. Her skin wasn't flawless, a faint stretch mark on her hips, a slight softness on her stomach. Yet these imperfections made her more captivating than any youthful perfection. Her breasts, though not overtly defiant, were full and tender. Her body wasn't toned, but it possessed a sensual grace that only experience could imbue. I leaned down and kissed her shoulder, where the faint blue veins showed through the thin skin. She tilted her head slightly, closed her eyes, and bit her lip to stifle a moan. I moved lower, to her belly, kissing every trace of time, as if thanking it for its existence. Elara slid her hand into my hair, held me tight and whispered, "You make me feel alive." I pulled her down onto the couch, our bodies tangling together, not with aggressive passion, but with profound gratitude. Each movement was an apology for the years we hadn't touched the right person. We loved each other with everything we weren't allowed to, but also with everything we had left in our hearts. Then, Elara rested her head on my chest, her breathing slowing. I stroked her hair and said softly, "I'm sorry." She replied, whispering like the wind, "Don't apologize for something that makes you no longer lonely." When I woke, it was already dawn. Elara was no longer beside me. I saw her on the porch, standing alone, holding a cup of tea, her gaze fixed on the distant, misty hills. The early morning sunlight sifted through her tousled hair, and I realized perhaps it was her loneliness that made her so beautiful, but it was also that loneliness that would ensure tomorrow would not be like today. Summer came home late one afternoon. She didn't knock, didn't wait for anyone to open the door. The key, an old habit, was still in her pocket. I was in the kitchen washing glasses. Elara was upstairs. When the door opened, I turned. Summer stood there, her hair down, her face bare, her eyes subtly shadowed, and her smile so forced my heart plummeted. "I'm home," Summer whispered. I walked closer. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say it," she replied quickly, taking off her shoes and walking in as if nothing had happened. That night, she ate little, asked no questions, mentioned nothing. I sat across from her, chewing a piece of vegetable, tasting nothing. Elara didn't come down to eat. She said she was tired. Summer just nodded. After the meal, Summer took her bag and gestured. "I'm going for a walk. Let me go with you." "No need," she said, her eyes as cold as the early winter wind. Late that night, hurried footsteps echoed from the bathroom, then the sound of Summer's door slamming shut. A moment later, a muffled sob. I was about to knock, but my hand stopped mid-air. The next morning, as I finished washing my face, Summer emerged from her room, a pregnancy test in her hand. 2 lines. So clear, it hurt my eyes. I stood frozen. Summer looked at me, not with anger or blame, but her eyes were no longer the Summer I knew. "You don't need to explain anything," she said, her voice choked but trying to remain calm. "I knew before I got this test." I clenched my fists. "Summer, are you going to keep the baby?" She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, not for you, but because I need something to love without being betrayed." I sat in the living room for hours after that. Elara came downstairs, saw me, and stopped. "Things are going to get more complicated," I said, my gaze distant. "Summer is pregnant." Elara's hands flew to the back of the chair, her entire body stiffening, as if she had just heard a final, irrevocable verdict. "She said she would keep the baby." Elara nodded, then whispered, "What happened between us should end." I didn't object, because in that moment I knew one night, one emotion, one body can make us forget everything. But one new life, one precious being, will make us unable to continue on the old path. I'm not sure when it began, but something in Elara shifted. She stopped pouring mint tea every morning. She no longer descended to the kitchen before me. Her eyes, though still gentle, carried an inexplicable silence. I didn't dare ask, perhaps because I was afraid, perhaps because I knew I was no longer qualified. One time, I saw her standing for a long moment in front of the living room window, her hand resting on her lower abdomen. I didn't know if it was pain or just an unconscious gesture. When I was about to speak, she turned away. A few days later, I accidentally found a small medicine bag in a kitchen drawer. The pharmacy receipt was still there. Inside, a used pregnancy test, carefully wrapped in a paper bag, nestled between 2 pieces of white tissue. I didn't dare open it. There was no need. Just that one detail was enough to clench my heart. Elara, I couldn't be certain, but my instinct screamed that in this house, something else was silently, unnoticeably growing. That night, she came down for a late dinner. Sitting across from me, Elara picked up a piece of boiled vegetable, then put down her chopsticks. She frowned slightly. "Are you tired?" I asked. She simply nodded, saying nothing more. Then she stood up before anyone else had touched their chopsticks. I sat for a long time after the meal, staring at her unfinished glass of water. Everything in the house was changing. Summer suddenly became quieter, no longer smiling much. Elara avoided eye contact. As for me, I could only guess, feeling like I was standing in the middle of a blurred map, all directions obscured. Late one night, unable to sleep, I walked out onto the porch. Elara was sitting there, her head resting on the arm of the chair, a small notebook in her hand. She didn't flinch when she saw me, merely looked away, then said softly, "There are things, when they happen, people don't have plan A anymore." I was silent, listening, not fully comprehending. "What are you thinking?" I asked softly. She shook her head, her voice as thin as smoke. "I'm writing Plan 2. I didn't ask more because sometimes people speak half a truth to keep the other half as an anchor. Since Summer told me she was pregnant, I'd been living like a man counting his steps in a sinkhole. Every morning I woke up playing the role of a guilty boyfriend about to become a father, ready to make amends. But when night fell, I was just a man who didn't know who he was. Summer had become less talkative. She no longer asked what I'd eaten, no longer initiated conversations, no longer leaned on my shoulder every night for movies. Instead, she immersed herself in pregnancy books, YouTube videos about nutrition and sleep for expectant mothers. One time I saw her taking notes. "What are you writing?" I asked. Summer didn't look up, merely said, "A list of names." I smiled awkwardly. "Baby names?" "Yeah," she replied softly. "Ellie for a girl. Haven't decided yet for a boy." I stood there, unsure whether to be happy or worried, because in that moment I felt like I was no longer part of the decision. I was just a bystander, a guest in my own story. Elara was still silent. She lived the same way, but her actions were slower, more careful. I saw her rubbing her lower belly and staying up later than usual at night. I wanted to ask, truly wanted to, but the question, "Are you pregnant?" wasn't something people said aloud. It was in the eyes, in the way people looked at each other a little longer, then quietly looked away. One afternoon, Elara was hanging laundry. I stood by the kitchen window, watching her hand lightly touch her back as she bent down. "Do you have back pain?" I asked through the glass. She looked up, smiling softly. "Maybe. Age doesn't spare anyone." I smiled along, but my heart was heavy. Age or something else. I scribbled a few lines in my notebook. 2 souls are growing, one from a young love, one from a right mistake. But if both need me, then who am I? The father, the redeemer? Or just a child standing at the crossroads without a light? I closed the notebook, stuffing it into my pocket, suffocating from the unsaid words. At night, I lay between 2 spaces. On one side, Summer, sleeping on her back, hugging her pillow. On the other, Elara, a floor away, a wall away, and a distance no one dared to cross. I closed my eyes, not wanting to sleep, just hoping someone would choose a direction for me to walk, because I wasn't sure I had the courage to choose. I woke to a soft moan in the night. At first I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, short, sharp, muffled, like someone trying to endure silent agony. I opened the door. The hallway was dark, the yellow light from downstairs casting dim shadows up the stairs. The moan came from Elara's room. I knocked softly. "Elara, are you okay?" No one answered. I pushed the door open. Elara lay curled up on the bed, her face pale, her hands clutching her lower abdomen. Her forehead was covered in sweat, her eyes open, but lifeless. I ran over and knelt beside the bed. "Are you in a lot of pain? Do you need an ambulance?" She didn't answer, just took my hand, squeezing it, as if it were the only thing grounding her to the world. Summer woke as I helped Elara out of the room. "What happened?" she panicked, stepping closer. Elara groaned softly, her face ashen. "My mother has a terrible stomachache," I quickly replied. "You have to take her to the hospital." Summer stood still, her eyes fixed on her mother, the woman who had always been strong and proud, now leaning on my shoulder like a tree about to fall. She said nothing, but I saw in her eyes for the first time sympathy without blame. I drove like a madman through the night, my left hand on the steering wheel, my right holding Elara's hand. She didn't cry, but her breathing was rapid, her body trembling. I vividly remembered her making tea every morning, quietly tending to the lavender plants, the beauty of an experienced woman, self-controlled and discreet. And now that very woman was so fragile that just a few more minutes could mean losing everything. At the hospital, the doctor asked me to wait outside. I sat in the cold hallway, my hands clenched, my heart pounding. 10 minutes, 20, an hour. I can't recall how long, until the door opened and the doctor emerged. His face wasn't grave, but neither was it relieved. "We've got it under control," he said. "She had a miscarriage. Most likely from stress, but luckily she's stable." I nodded, my energy drained. "Can she go home early if there are no further complications?" "Tomorrow," she replied. I thanked her and exhaled slowly. When I entered the hospital room, Elara was sleeping, her face calmer but still pale. I sat next to her, holding her hand. Suddenly, Elara opened her eyes. "You know?" she asked very softly. I nodded. I had guessed it, but I wasn't sure. She didn't say anything, just looked out the window. I held her hand tighter. "Elara, I won't leave you alone." She turned, her eyes red, but for the first time she didn't pull her hand away. When we got home, it was just getting light. Summer was sitting on the porch, her eyes waiting, but not angry. When Elara got out of the car, Summer stood up and walked over. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice choked. Elara nodded. Summer helped her mother into the house as if for a moment. All her anger had been erased by that fragile life. And I stood back and wondered. Sometimes, little angels who haven't even been born yet teach adults how to forgive. 3 weeks after the hospital, the house was no longer the same. No one spoke of it, but everyone knew the days of an unbroken family were over. A life was saved, and a life was almost lost. Summer moved out into a small apartment in the city near her part-time job. She wouldn't let Leo move in, nor would she accept financial support from him. Just one sentence: "I'll keep the baby, but not you." Leo drove her away in his old car. As he opened the trunk, helping her move the last box, Summer said only, "You can come visit the baby anytime, but please don't make her think her parents had a beautiful love." Leo said nothing. He knew Summer wasn't angry anymore, but she wasn't in love either. Elara kept the baby. She didn't tell anyone, not even Leo, that she had almost lost it. She just quietly changed her diet, went for regular checkups, and slowed down. One afternoon, Leo saw her standing in the garden, her hand on her belly, the sunlight slanting through the trees, making her shadow lengthen like someone else, an older version, but more resilient and stronger. Leo walked over and stood next to her. Elara didn't turn around, just said, "You don't have to stay here forever because of responsibility. I won't keep you." He replied softly, "Not responsibility, but gratitude." She turned around, her eyes wet, but her lips smiling. "Then live a kinder life from now on. Not for me, for the baby." Leo rented a small apartment less than a 15-minute drive from Elara's house and almost twice as far from Summer's. There was nothing much in the room but his computer, a single bed, and a photo he'd hung on the wall, a picture of Elara holding a child, Summer, running through the lavender fields. He hung it as a reminder. There had been something beautiful about this place, though there was no going back. Summer texted a week after moving out. "I haven't picked a name yet, but if it's a girl, maybe Ellie, like I said. If it's a boy, I think we'll name him Leo, because at least I want him to be stronger than me." Leo read the text, didn't reply, just saved it on his phone. That same day, Elara texted, "I just had an ultrasound. The baby's fine. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but he definitely has your eyes." Leo read it, and then cried for the first time. Since then, no one called him Dad, but he knew he was an indelible part of the two souls about to come into this world. At the end of that turbulent summer, Elara sent a handwritten letter. Not long, not many words. Only the last line made Leo keep it in his wallet forever. "We can't choose who we love, but we can choose how to live so that our old love doesn't become a stain. If one day my child asks, 'Who is your father?' I want to say, 'Your father is the one who made mistakes, but learned to stand up.'" 6 months later, the car stopped quietly in front of a small obstetrics and gynecology clinic in the suburbs. Leo turned off the engine, his hand on the steering wheel for another beat before turning around. Summer sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. Her eyes were no longer as cold as before, but they did not contain the old intimacy, just a silence, as if they had learned to accept each other as two parallel lines, once intersecting, then forever separating. "Will you come in too?" she asked softly. Leo nodded. "Need to." The clinic hallway was softly lit, the smell of antiseptic mingling with the distant murmur of voices. Leo sat waiting, his eyes on the wall clock, then on his hand, still wearing the old leather bracelet Summer had given him on his birthday. Something inside him had not yet left. Outside, in a corner of a small cafe near the clinic, Elara sat. She chose a table that overlooked the large glass doors facing the clinic. On the table was a cup of cold mint tea and an old leather notebook. She wasn't there to see anyone, not to intrude, just to find out what the man who had gotten her and her daughter pregnant was doing with the rest of his responsibility. Elara saw Leo walk out, his expression both tense and relieved. Summer followed, the ultrasound image clutched in her hand, her eyes downcast. No one spoke, but they both paused for a few seconds on the steps, as if some invisible agreement had been made between them. They would raise the child together, but no longer belong to each other. Elara bowed her head, writing a line in her notebook. Love isn't something you always have to hold on to. Sometimes it just needs to be witnessed from afar, like a wind that once passed through your heart. She put down her pen and stood up. Leo turned, as if he sensed it. He saw Elara walking across the street, not looking at him, not stopping, but in that split second, something quietly stirred in his chest. Not love, not regret, just an aftertaste. Autumn arrived early that year. The leaves changed color quickly. The wind blew more gently. Summer began to clean the small room for the baby. Elara continued to plant lavender. Leo learned to be there quietly, not to interfere, not to retreat. 3 people. 2 unborn children. And an old story no one mentioned anymore. At the end of this journey, there was no dramatic reunion, no tragic separation. There was just something left, like the lingering aftertaste of a past pain. Thank you for listening to the story of Leo, Summer, and Elara, a tale that is not simple, not easy to accept, but profoundly true. What do you think about the characters in this story? Elara, a mature, experienced woman who dared to live and to keep her child despite the odds. Summer, a carefree young girl who soon faced the painful cracks of shattered trust, yet found strength. Leo, a man who made mistakes, but was also the one who had to learn to truly grow up. We look forward to reading your thoughts.